So I mentioned the CRISPR editing technique. We also have, so way back, we had the agrobacterium, which we still use quite a bit. There's even this thing called the gene gun, which sounds like a sci-fi thing where you like take
gene gun
gold. Yep.
Nice.
Sounds very sci-fi. You take like gold particles that are coded with your gene of interest, and then kind of like literally bombard your genome with these like gold particles. So I think that CRISPR, I don't know if you've read the book A Crack in Creation by Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize for CRISPR, but she does a lot of talking about how agriculture is kind of really where we're seeing CRISPR being used a lot in, and she mentions the citrus disease I was talking about. She actually mentioned my old lab, which is nice to, that was cool to see when I was reading the book. I'm like, that's pretty cool.
That's always nice.
Yeah. A lot of people think of, CRISPR as like human health, which I think we're already seeing some of that now, but I think the biggest impacts are already happening in like agriculture. So.
Yeah, no, I think like a lot of the press about CRISPR has been like how people think it will be used for humans or other animals, but actually the plant it's used in plants, I hadn't heard before.
Yep. And there's some other, other gene editing techniques. I feel like CRISPR kind of like became the gold standard kind of, but before CRISPR, there was something called TALEN. So TAL effectors are proteins from pathogens that can bind to transcription factor. They're transcription activator-like, so they can bind to promoter regions of a host DNA, and then that's another way to do targeted edits. But CRISPR kind of overtook that one. There's also like zinc finger nucleases. There's a bunch of different ways to edit genomes, but CRISPR kind of became the gold standard. So.
Okay, and then I think one of the last questions I'll ask you is like, what's the reason why like using CRISPR to edit the genomes of plants? How come like that's safe, and how come like what's the actual reason why consuming those types of plants are safe for humans?
That's a great question. So if you think about editing a plant, or even introducing a new gene, you're adding like one gene usually, or you're changing like a very small fragment of thousands and thousands of bases in the genetic code. When if you think about just random mutations that are happening to plants in the wild, this is, it's way more than, we're editing in the lab. Or for example, selective breeding, you're introducing way more new genetic mixing and matching than you would in a typical, you're just introducing, one transgene, for example. So what's happening in the wild with a lot of these plants, or even like during breeding together of different plants, it's way more modification than what's happening, in the lab. So you kind of thinking about it in that way, I think, alleviates some concern, I think.
Okay, so like the actual like edits themselves, are the actual edits themselves that you're making in the lab like similar to what like would be happening in nature? You're just saying like the scale of it is less.
Correct, the scale of it is less. And even GMO, with this agrobacterium that I mentioned, that's happening in nature also. So the same exact thing that is happening in nature, we're just taking that technology and then doing it ourselves. So.
Okay, I see. Yeah, you know what? Like I think when it's just like when people hear that I think when people hear that like there's like genetic changes being done in a lab. Like I think the fact that it's in a lab is like, ooh, like it's like a weird thing.
Exactly. As soon as you like bring in lab, then it sounds like, I think a lot of that has to do with like the mad scientist and like the evil scientist, kind of like in books and movies and comics and stuff, that have kind of filtered into the public consciousness, I would say. But when you think about, you know, what's going on in nature, and you're having all this you know, flow of genetic information that's going on anyway out in nature, I think that kind of helps people feel more comfortable. So